In June 1940, Benito Mussolini stood before the Italian people and declared war. But he wasn't declaring war to defend Italy, he was declaring war to conquer. With German armies smashing across Europe, Mussolini saw his moment. France was collapsing, Britain stood alone, the world seemed to be reshaping itself before his eyes. And Il Duce intended Italy to have its share of glory. What followed was one of the most spectacular series of military disasters in history: the invasion of Greece, the collapse in North Africa, the humiliation of Italian forces across 2 continents. In less than a year, Mussolini's dreams of imperial conquest had become a nightmare of defeat and retreat. By 1943, the situation was catastrophic. German and Italian forces in North Africa were surrounded, squeezed from east and west, running out of supplies, running out of options. Military command had simple advice for Il Duce: it's finished. The war in Africa is over. The only question now is how fast they surrender. One man disagreed. His name was Giovanni Messe. Not a political favorite, not a flashy, arrogant commander promising miracles, just an aging general with one of the finest military minds Italy had produced in decades. And when everyone told Mussolini to give up, when the generals said the position was impossible to hold, when even Rommel himself was fleeing Africa, Messe made a choice. He decided to fight. This is what happened when one man's refusal to surrender forced the entire Allied war machine to prove that victory demands a price. To understand Giovanni Messe, you have to go back further than North Africa. You have to go back to where he was forged, not in parade grounds or political connections, but in the trenches of World War I. Messe was born in 1883 in Messenia, a small town in southern Italy. He came from nothing, no aristocratic family connections, no powerful patrons. He had one thing: military talent. He enlisted as a young man and fought in the trenches of the First World War. While other officers were buying commissions or trading favors, Messe was in the mountains, fighting Austrians, learning how soldiers actually die, understanding what it took to make men hold a line when everything told them to break. During that war, he made a reputation for something unusual. He didn't waste men. When other commanders sent thousands to die for small gains, Messe planned carefully. He coordinated. He made every soldier count. By 1918, he had risen to major. He commanded what the Italians called the Arditi Elite shock troops, the best the Italian army had. These weren't conscripts or militia. These were volunteers, professional soldiers who had chosen to be the most dangerous men in the Italian military. They followed Messe because he kept them alive. Not because he was soft, but because every order he gave had been thought through. Because he understood that bravery without strategy was just suicide dressed up in military decoration. When Mussolini came to power in the 1920s, he needed generals, experienced men, officers with real combat service. Messe had all of that. But here's where Messe's story becomes important. Mussolini didn't like him. The reason was simple. Mussolini surrounded himself with loyalists, generals who would do whatever Il Duce commanded, no matter how strategically stupid it was. Generals who understood that political survival meant agreeing with the boss. Messe had a problem with that. He was a professional soldier, not a politician in uniform. When Mussolini asked him if an operation was possible, Messe would tell him the truth, not the flattering version, not the version that made Il Duce look good. The truth. This is why, through the 1930s, Messe was kept away from the most prestigious assignments. He served in Libya during the conquest of Abyssinia. He commanded border troops. He was given responsible positions, but never the positions of supreme authority. Mussolini didn't trust him, and Messe didn't trust Mussolini. But when war came, Messe finally got a major command. In November 1940, he was given command of the Italian Special Army Corps in Greece. This was supposed to be a victory lap. Greek forces were supposedly weak. The invasion was supposed to be a walkover that would show the world Italian military might. Instead, everything went wrong. The Greeks fought with incredible courage. They were defending their homeland. They had nowhere to retreat to, and they were commanded by a general named Alexandros Papagos, who understood mountain warfare better than anyone. Messe's corps started getting pushed backward. In the mountains of Albania and northern Greece, Italian forces were being beaten by an enemy that was supposed to be completely outmatched. This should have been a disaster. Instead, something unexpected happened. Messe organized a defensive line. He studied the terrain. He positioned his men not on the valleys where they would be slaughtered, but on the high ground. He created layered defenses. He made every position support the position behind it. And then something remarkable occurred. He stopped the Greek advance. When German forces arrived to rescue Mussolini from his mess in Greece, they were amazed at what Messe had done. With outnumbered, demoralized troops, using only the terrain and careful planning, he had stabilized a line that was falling apart. Hitler himself took note. He told Mussolini that Messe was one of the few Italian generals who showed real military competence. But Mussolini wasn't grateful. He was threatened. Here was a general getting praise from Hitler, a general who had proven he could stand against overwhelming odds, a general who didn't need Il Duce's approval to be effective. So Mussolini did what he always did with capable men he couldn't control. He got rid of him. He transferred Messe to Russia. In April 1941, Messe was given command of the Italian Expeditionary Corps in Russia. This was effectively exile. Mussolini was sending him as far away from the Mediterranean theater as possible. The CSIR Corpo di Spedizione Italiano in Russia consisted of about 60,000 Italian troops. They were sent to support Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. They were equipped with summer uniforms and light weapons designed for Mediterranean warfare. They were being sent to fight on the frozen steppes. Messe immediately understood the problem. These men weren't equipped for this. They had no winter clothing, no proper anti-tank weapons, no vehicles that could operate in sub-zero temperatures. They were, in effect, being sent to die. But he took the assignment anyway, because that's who Messe was. When given an impossible task, he didn't whine or blame Mussolini. He accepted it and did everything in his power to make it work. For over a year, Messe commanded Italian troops on the Eastern Front. They fought in summer offensives. They held positions in winter. Men froze to death. Men starved. Men were captured or killed in numbers that shocked even the Germans. By December 1942, the Italian army in Russia had grown to over 200,000 men, and they were being systematically destroyed. The Soviets concentrated their forces opposite the Italians. They recognized that Italian units, while brave, were poorly equipped and inadequately supplied. They could be broken. In Operation Saturn, the Soviets attacked en masse. Wave after wave, the Italians held for days, then weeks, then their ammunition ran out and they had to retreat. Messe filed reports with Rome, detailed requests for supplies, for reinforcements, for proper anti-tank weapons, for winter equipment, for anything that would let his men survive. Rome ignored most of them. Mussolini's attention was elsewhere. By late 1942, it was clear that the German-Italian forces in Russia were being pushed back systematically. The Nazis were already planning their own withdrawal. The Italians were being left behind to slow the Soviet advance. Messe was promoted out of Russia in November 1942. He left with the knowledge that the Italian army in Russia was finished. The men he had trained, the units he had commanded, most of them would be captured or killed within months. But he was leaving for something else. He was being sent to North Africa. By February 1943, the situation in North Africa was collapsing for the Axis. The British 8th Army under Bernard Montgomery had crushed Rommel at El Alamein in October 1942. They had chased the German and Italian forces 1,500 kilometers across the desert and into Tunisia. At the same time, Operation Torch the Anglo-American invasion in November 1942 had landed forces in Algeria and Morocco. Now the Axis was being squeezed from two directions. Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, had been appointed commander of Army Group Africa. But he was sick, exhausted, broken by the endless defeats. He wanted out of Africa. He met with Mussolini and Hitler. He told them the same thing. North Africa is lost. We need to evacuate while we still can. If we don't extract our forces now, we'll lose 250,000 men. Mussolini refused to listen. Hitler wanted to hold Tunisia. Political symbolism, pride, the idea that Axis forces could still achieve victory. Neither leader would accept reality. Rommel left Africa on March 9, 1943. But before he went, he handed over command of the German-Italian forces to another officer. Giovanni Messe was given command of what was now called the First Italian Army. Officially, it was a combined Italo-German force multiple corps, including the survivors of the Afrika Korps and German reinforcements, but under an Italian commander. In reality, Messe was being set up to preside over a surrender. When Messe arrived in Tunisia, he found a situation that military officers described as impossible. The Allies had overwhelming superiority. Over 200,000 British and American troops against less than 250,000 Axis forces. But those numbers were deceptive. The Allies controlled the air completely. They controlled the Mediterranean. They had endless supplies coming through ports and landing fields they controlled. The Axis had no supplies, no air cover, no ability to bring reinforcements. The British Eighth Army was advancing from the east, fresh from victory at El Alamein. American forces were advancing from the west. Between them, the Axis forces were being compressed into a smaller and smaller pocket. Messe's predecessor, Erwin Rommel, had suggested one thing before leaving: defend the Mareth Line. The Mareth Line was a series of French fortifications built in the 1930s. They stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the Matmata Hills about 22 kilometers wide. In front of the line was open ground. Behind it was another line of hills and fortified positions. If Axis forces could hold here, they could slow the Allied advance. They could buy time. Maybe, just maybe, they could force negotiations. But Messe's commanders told him it was impossible. The British had overwhelming artillery. The Americans had superior numbers. The position was too exposed. The defenses were too old. The troops were too tired. Surrender was inevitable. Why waste lives? Messe made a decision. He would defend the Mareth Line. Not because he believed he could win. Not because he thought the war could be turned around, but because every day he held the line was a day the Allies couldn't attack elsewhere. Every soldier who stood here was a soldier who could slow the inevitable. It was the opposite of what Mussolini wanted. Il Duce wanted a negotiated surrender, a deal where Italy could exit the war with some dignity. Messe was going to make the Allies pay in blood for every kilometer they advanced. Messe arrived at the Mareth Line in late February 1943. What he found was a mess. The French fortifications were old, the concrete was cracked, the gun emplacements were deteriorated, the trenches had been partially destroyed, and the entire line was covered by open ground perfect for Allied artillery to devastate. Most commanders would have looked at this and said, "We can't hold this." Messe looked at it and saw opportunity. He did something that wouldn't be obvious to a casual observer. He studied the landscape. The Mareth Line ran north to south, but it wasn't a simple straight line. There were natural features, hills, valleys, Wadi-dry riverbeds that could channel enemy movements. Messe understood something that many military commanders never grasp. Terrain is strategy. He began reorganizing the defenses. Instead of trying to hold every position on the line, he created what military theorists call defense in depth. This meant, first, a forward line of trenches and fortifications that would bleed the attackers but was expected to be penetrated. Second, a main defensive line behind that, with better fortifications, more men, and concentrated firepower. Third, a third line further back, where reserves could counterattack if the main line was breached. The genius of Messe's plan was this: the Allies would have to attack multiple times. Each time they broke through one line, they would run into another. They would have to reorganize. They would have to bring up more artillery. They would take casualties. And every day they spent doing this was a day Messe had gained. Messe drove the construction forward. He brought in Italian engineers. He requisitioned German resources. He positioned men. He created killing zones. He organized fields of fire from multiple positions so that attacking troops would be caught in crossfire. And he prepared for the specific threat the Allies presented. On February 26, the British 8th Army attacked. Bernard Montgomery was methodical. He wasn't a dashing cavalry commander like Rommel. He was a planner. He carefully prepared attacks with overwhelming artillery and air support. He tried to ensure that his forces always had superiority on the ground. Montgomery attacked the coastal sector of the Mareth Line first, where the fortifications were strongest, where the terrain offered the least maneuver room. He expected to break through. Instead, he ran into Messe's defense in depth. The British attacked. They penetrated the first line. The Italian defenders fell back to the second line, which was prepared and fortified. They held. The British attacked again. They took the second line, but now they were tired, depleted, running low on ammunition, and behind them more Axis defenders were digging in on the third line. This went on for days. The British would attack. Messe's forces would give ground slowly, inflicting casualties at each step. Then they would dig in and defend the next position. It was exactly what Messe had planned. The Allies were buying their victory with blood. But there's another part of Messe's genius that showed in these days. He was watching, learning, observing how Montgomery attacked, how the British coordinated their artillery, how their armor moved. Most commanders would be panicked, worried about holding on, thinking about retreat. Messe was learning the enemy. On March 6, Rommel launched a counterattack at a place called Medinine. He was trying to hit the British before they could reorganize after breaking through the Mareth Line. It should have caught them by surprise. Instead, the British were ready. They had broken the German codes. They knew the attack was coming. They positioned anti-tank guns in depth. When the German and Italian armor attacked, they ran into a wall of fire. The counterattack failed. Rommel lost 52 tanks and over 600 casualties. It was Rommel's final attack in North Africa. But here's something important. Messe wasn't foolish enough to repeat that mistake. When the British began moving again, when they threatened to encircle the Mareth Line, Messe didn't order a desperate counterattack. Instead, he ordered a fighting withdrawal. This is where the second part of his genius showed. At a place called Tebaga Gap, the British tried to cut off the Axis retreat. Messe had positioned forces there to hold, to buy time for the main force to escape. The battle was ferocious. The New Zealand forces attacking Tebaga Gap ran into Italian defenders who had been told, "Hold until the main army gets away." They held. They held through artillery bombardment. They held through infantry assaults. They held long enough for the main army to withdraw north. Then they fell back in good order, taking up new defensive positions. This is the thing about Messe's defense that made it so effective. He understood that defense doesn't mean staying